In this video, we'll be exploring 3 creepy sleepover horror stories that may make you question the safety of your own bedroom. So, grab your flashlight, huddle under your blanket, and get ready. Hi, it's great to meet you. My name is Mark, and I am going to be narrating this part of the video. So, sit back and enjoy the journey. The mansion was an unexpected gift from Alice's rich uncle, who had recently passed away. It had been in her family for generations, but no one had visited it in years due to its remote location. Alice had decided to invite her childhood friends for a sleepover, hoping to explore the old house and uncover its secrets. As she stepped through the threshold, she was immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere of the mansion. The air was musty and damp, and the walls were covered in ivy. The windows were dark and foreboding, and Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows. Her friends arrived shortly after, and they all greeted each other with excited hugs and chatter. They marveled at the mansion's opulent decor, with its antique furniture and paintings lining the walls. The creaky floorboards added to the house's haunting aura, and Alice couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. As they settled into their rooms, Alice's friends continued to chatter excitedly about the weekend's plans. They had brought board games, snacks, and movies to entertain themselves. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had a nagging suspicion that the old mansion held dark secrets, and she couldn't wait to uncover them. The old Victorian mansion stood tall and imposing against the backdrop of the night sky. Alice had always been skeptical of the rumors of the house being cursed, but as she approached the gate, a sense of unease washed over her. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she walked up the cobblestone path towards the front door. As the night settled in, Alice and her friends sat huddled together on the living room couch, watching a horror movie. The mansion was silent except for the creaking of the floorboards and the howling wind outside. Suddenly, a loud thud sounded from upstairs, causing everyone to jump. Alice's friend, Emily, let out a scream and clung to Alice's arm. "What was that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Alice tried to calm her friend's nerves. "It's probably just the old house settling. I'm sure it's nothing." But deep down, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She could feel a sense of unease settling in her gut, and her senses were on high alert. As they resumed watching the movie, strange noises continued to echo throughout the mansion. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth on the upper floor. Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to ignore the noises, but her friends were clearly frightened. "Can we please turn on the lights?" Emily pleaded, her eyes darting around the darkened room. Alice hesitated for a moment before agreeing. She didn't want to scare her friends any further, but the noises were making her uneasy as well. As she stood up to flip the switch, something brushed against her ankle, causing her to let out a scream. She looked down and saw a small figure dart under the couch. "What was that?" Alice exclaimed, her voice shaking. Emily and the others peered under the couch, but there was nothing there. The mansion was still except for the strange noises that continued to haunt them. As the night dragged on, Alice and her friends huddled together in fear, waiting for the morning light to bring them some relief. But little did they know, the night was far from over, and the strange noises were only the beginning of their nightmare. The next morning, Alice's friends were hesitant to explore the mansion. The strange noises from the night before still echoed in their minds, and the creaky floorboards seemed more ominous than ever. But Alice was determined to uncover the secrets of the mansion. She had a sense that there was something dark lurking in its shadows, and she couldn't rest until she had discovered what it was. As they sat in the dining room, eating breakfast, Alice noticed a dusty old YJ board sitting on a shelf. Her heart leapt with excitement. This could be their chance to communicate with the spirits of the mansion and uncover its dark secrets. "Let's try to contact the spirits of the house," Alice suggested to her friends. Her friends looked at her skeptically, but Alice's excitement was contagious. They hesitantly agreed to try the Ouija board. As they set up the board in the living room, Alice could feel a sense of anticipation building in her chest. The mansion was silent, except for the sound of their breathing as they placed their fingers on the planchette. "Is there anyone here?" Alice asked, her voice trembling with excitement. The planchette moved slowly at first, but then it began to spell out a message. It spelled out the name of a young girl who had lived in the mansion over a century ago. Alice's friends looked at her with shock and disbelief, but Alice could feel a sense of validation in her bones. She knew that there was something dark lurking in the mansion, and this message confirmed her suspicions. As they continued to communicate with the spirits of the mansion, Alice could feel a sense of unease building in the pit of her stomach. The spirits seemed to be growing more and more agitated, and the planchette was moving faster and faster. Suddenly, the planchette flew off the board, and the lights in the mansion flickered out. The mansion was plunged into darkness, and Alice and her friends were left alone with the spirits. Alice and her friends sat frozen in the darkness, their eyes straining to see anything in the blackness of the mansion. The Ouija board lay forgotten on the floor, its planchette still quivering where it had flown off. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in the distance, and Alice's heart leapt with hope. But as the light grew closer, she could see that it was not a friendly presence. It was a shadowy figure, slowly making its way towards them. Alice's friends began to scream, but Alice could not move. She felt rooted to the spot, unable to tear her eyes away from the shadowy figure. It was moving closer and closer, and Alice could feel its cold breath on her face. Just as she thought the figure was about to touch her, it dissipated into the darkness, leaving behind a chilling silence. Alice and her friends were left alone in the darkness once again. They huddled together, too terrified to speak. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, and Alice's friends jumped in terror. Alice recognized the sound immediately. It was coming from the attic. With shaking limbs, Alice led her friends up the creaky staircase to the attic. The air grew colder and more oppressive with every step they took, and Alice could feel a sense of foreboding building in the pit of her stomach. As they reached the attic, Alice could see that something was very wrong. The room was filled with cobwebs and dust, but it was also filled with strange artifacts. There were old books, strange symbols, and jars filled with strange liquids. Alice felt a sense of dread building in the pit of her stomach. She could sense that they had stumbled onto something that they were not supposed to see, but it was too late to turn back now. They had to find out what was going on in this mansion, no matter the cost. Alice and her friends began to search the attic for any clues as to what was going on in the mansion. They carefully avoided the strange artifacts, not wanting to disturb anything. As they searched, Alice's eyes fell upon an old book sitting on a dusty table in the corner of the room. The book's cover was worn and faded, and Alice could see that it was written in a language she did not recognize, curiosity getting the better of her. Alice picked up the book and began to flip through its pages. As she read, she realized with a growing sense of horror that the book was a grimoire, a book of dark magic. The pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations, and Alice could feel a sense of dread building in the pit of her stomach. She knew that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. Just then, Alice's friends let out a gasp. They had found something else in the attic, a pentagram etched into the wooden floorboards. Alice knew immediately what this meant. They were dealing with a demon, and it was powerful. They had to leave the mansion before it was too late. But as they turned to leave, they heard a voice calling out to them from the shadows. Leaving so soon, Alice and her friends froze in terror as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the same shadowy figure they had seen earlier, but this time it was solid and real. The figure approached them, and Alice could feel its cold breath on her face. She could see now that it was not human, but something far more sinister. The demon spoke again, its voice low and menacing. "You should not have come here," it said. "You have disturbed my slumber, and now you must pay the price." Alice and her friends were trapped. They knew that they were no match for this demon, but they also knew that they could not run. They had to find a way to defeat it, no matter the cost. Alice and her friends stood face to face with the demon, their hearts pounding in their chests. The demon towered over them, its eyes glowing with a malevolent energy. Alice knew that they had only one chance to defeat it. She pulled out the Book of Shadows that she had found in the attic and began to recite the incantations that she had memorized. Her friends stood by her side, ready to fight, but as Alice spoke the words, they could feel the air around them grow thick and heavy. Suddenly, the demon let out a blood-curdling scream, its body writhing in agony. Alice knew that they were making progress, but they had to keep going. She recited the incantations faster and faster, her voice growing stronger with each passing moment. Her friends joined in, chanting with her, as they poured every ounce of their energy into the fight. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The demon let out one final, agonized scream and then dissipated into the air. Alice and her friends collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but victorious. They had defeated the demon and saved themselves from a terrible fate. As they caught their breath, they realized that they were still trapped in the mansion. But this time, they were not afraid. They knew that they could face anything together. They worked together to find a way out of the mansion, and eventually, they stumbled upon a secret passageway that led them to safety. As they emerged into the sunlight, Alice and her friends felt a sense of relief wash over them. They had survived the night, and they had done it together. But as they walked away from the mansion, Alice couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone to uncover them. She knew that they had been lucky this time, but she also knew that there were many more demons out there, waiting to be defeated. And she was ready for whatever lay ahead.
Hi, nice meeting you. My name is Olivia and I'm going to be narrating this part of the video. So, sit back and enjoy the journey. Emma and her friends arrived at the old mansion turned bed and breakfast for their much anticipated sleepover party. The large, sprawling mansion was said to be haunted, and Emma couldn't wait to explore every inch of it. They had rented one of the rooms on the top floor, which was rumored to be the most haunted of them all. As soon as they entered the room, Emma's attention was drawn to the strange mirror that hung on the wall. It was unlike any mirror she had ever seen before. The ornate golden frame had intricate carvings etched into it, and the mirror itself was covered in a thick layer of dust. Emma walked towards the mirror. Her curiosity piqued. She noticed that there was an old portrait of a man hidden behind the grime on the mirror's surface. She could barely make out the features of his face, but she was curious about who he was and why his portrait was hidden in the mirror. As she reached out to clean the surface of the glass with her sleeve, she felt a strange energy emanating from it. The mirror started to glow, and Emma took a step back in shock. The rest of her friends gathered around the mirror, and they too were amazed by the strange phenomenon. Suddenly, Emma noticed something strange in the reflection of the mirror. There was a figure standing behind her, a ghostly visitor that had appeared out of nowhere. Emma let out a scream and turned around to face the ghostly figure, but it had disappeared. She realized that the ghostly visitor was trapped inside the mirror, and they had awakened it with their curiosity. Emma and her friends tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. They were trapped inside with the ghostly visitor, who seemed to be growing more and more agitated by the minute. The ghostly figure started to manifest in the real world, causing objects to move on their own and strange noises to fill the air. Emma and her friends were terrified and didn't know what to do. They tried to banish the ghostly visitor with various methods, but nothing seemed to work. The ghostly figure was getting stronger, and it was only a matter of time before it caused them harm. Emma realized that they needed to uncover the truth about the ghostly visitor to banish it, but that would prove to be no easy task. Emma and her friends were still trapped inside the haunted room, unable to escape. They decided that they needed to uncover the history of the mansion and the ghostly visitor to understand why they were being haunted. Emma went over and tried to open the door handle again, and it suddenly popped open. She let out a gasp of relief. Emma and her friends split up and started to search the mansion for any clues. Emma went to the library, hoping to find some information in the old books that lined the shelves. As she was searching through the books, she noticed that one of them had fallen to the ground. She picked it up and realized that it was a diary from the early 1900s. The diary belonged to the previous owner of the mansion, a man named Charles. Emma started to read the diary, and she was shocked by what she discovered. Charles had been a cruel and abusive man, and he had tortured people for years. The diary was full of horrific details of the abuse, and Emma felt sick to her stomach as she read through it. As Emma continued to read, she realized that the ghostly visitor in the mirror was Charles himself. He had been trapped inside the mirror as punishment for his cruel and abusive behavior towards his family. Emma knew that they needed to find a way to release Charles from the mirror, to banish him from the mansion. Emma and her friends gathered together to discuss their plan. They decided that they needed to perform a ritual to release Charles from the mirror. The ritual required a special set of ingredients, including a silver knife and a lock of Charles' hair. They searched the mansion for the ingredients, and after hours of searching, they finally found everything they needed. They returned to the room and began the ritual. They recited the incantation, and Emma used the silver knife to cut the lock of hair. Suddenly, the mirror started to shake, and Charles appeared before them. He was angry and confused, but Emma explained to him what had happened and why he was trapped in the mirror. Charles was remorseful for his actions, and he begged for forgiveness. Emma and her friends forgave him, and he was finally able to move on from the mansion. As they walked out of the mansion, Emma and her friends felt a sense of relief. They had conquered their fears and banished the ghostly visitor from the mirror. Emma knew that she would never forget this experience, and she felt grateful to have had such brave and supportive friends by her side. Emma and her friends walked out of the mansion, feeling relieved and grateful for having survived the ordeal. They knew that they had just experienced something truly terrifying, and they were still processing everything that had happened. As they walked down the street, they couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. They walked for what felt like hours, trying to shake off the feeling of being followed. Eventually, they arrived back at Emma's apartment, and they immediately collapsed onto the couch. They were all exhausted, physically and emotionally. As they sat in silence, Emma realized that they had forgotten about something. The mirror. They had left it in the room, and they had never returned to retrieve it. Emma knew that they needed to go back and get it, but the thought of returning to the mansion filled her with dread. Despite their fear, they knew that they couldn't leave the mirror behind. It was too dangerous to be left in the mansion, and they needed to make sure that it was destroyed. They gathered their courage and made their way back to the mansion. As they approached the mansion, they noticed that something was different. The mansion was no longer the dilapidated run-down building that they had seen before. Instead, it was a beautiful and grand estate with manicured lawns and shining windows. It was as if the mansion had been completely restored to its former glory. Emma and her friends were confused and disoriented, but they knew that they needed to focus on the task at hand. They made their way to the room and found the mirror. Emma took out the silver knife and struck it against the mirror. To their surprise, the mirror shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, and a bright light filled the room. As the light faded, they realized that they were no longer in the mansion. They were standing in a beautiful garden, surrounded by flowers and trees. In front of them stood a woman who introduced herself as the guardian of the mirror. The guardian explained that the mansion had been cursed for years, and that Emma and her friends had broken the curse by freeing Charles from the mirror. She thanked them for their bravery and presented them with a gift, a small box filled with golden coins. Emma and her friends were stunned, but grateful for the gift. They thanked the guardian and made their way back to Emma's apartment, where they finally felt safe and at peace. As they sat together, counting the golden coins, Emma realized that they had been through something incredible. They had conquered their fears, saved a soul, and broken a curse. They had come out the other side stronger and more resilient than ever before. And they knew that they would never forget the ghostly visitor in the mirror or the journey that had led them to freedom.
Hi, my name is Dudley, and I'm going to be narrating this story for you. So sit back and let's begin the journey. The old cabin sat deep in the woods, shrouded in darkness and mystery. Emma had always been drawn to the place, with its creaky wooden floors, flickering candles, and an eerie aura. As she pulled up in her old Jeep, she felt a rush of excitement and anticipation. She was here to meet her childhood friends, Sarah, Alex, and James, for a sleepover, and they had planned a weekend of fun, games, and reminiscing. Emma couldn't wait to catch up with her friends, to laugh and to create new memories together. As she entered the cabin, she caught sight of a dusty old board game in the corner of the room. It was a mysterious game she had never seen before, with twisted symbols and strange markings etched onto the board. Emma couldn't help but feel drawn to it, her fingers itching to touch the pieces. "Hey guys," Emma said, gesturing to the board game. "What do you think about playing this?" Sarah's eyes widened. "I don't know. That game looks old and creepy." James laughed. "Come on, it can't be that bad. Let's give it a try." Alex shrugged. "Sure, why not? It's not like we have anything else to do tonight." As they began to set up the game, the owner of the cabin, a grizzled old man named Hank, appeared from the shadows. "Hey, what do you kids think you're doing?" he asked, his voice gruff. "We're just going to play this board game," Emma said, trying to sound nonchalant. Hank's face darkened. "That game is cursed, kids. You don't want to mess with it." Emma scoffed. "Come on, Hank. It's just a game." Hank shook his head and disappeared back into the shadows. Emma and her friends laughed, dismissing the old man's warning. They were in for a night of fun and games, or so they thought. As they began to play the game, Emma felt a strange energy coursing through her body. The game board was covered in twisted symbols and strange markings, and the pieces felt unnaturally heavy in her hands. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a grave mistake by playing this game, but she pushed those thoughts aside, determined to have a good time with her friends. Little did they know, they were about to unleash a terror beyond their wildest nightmares, a horror that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As Emma and her friends played the game, they quickly realized that it was not like any other board game they had played before. The rules were complicated, and the gameplay was intense. The board itself seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it was alive. Each player took their turn, moving their piece around the board, trying to avoid the dark symbols that seemed to lurk around every corner. The air in the cabin grew thick and heavy, and Emma felt a sense of unease wash over her. This game was starting to feel more and more dangerous. As they played, they began to hear strange noises coming from the woods outside the cabin. It sounded like footsteps and the occasional creak of a branch. The noises grew louder and more frequent, until they became impossible to ignore. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. James shrugged. "It's probably just an animal or something. Don't worry about it." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She looked around the room, her heart racing, and saw that the candles on the table were flickering wildly. The temperature in the room had dropped several degrees, and she could see her breath in the air. Suddenly, a deep, ominous voice filled the room. "Welcome to the game," it said, sending shivers down Emma's spine. "You have entered a realm beyond your wildest dreams or your worst nightmares. The rules are simple. Play the game and survive. Play the game and survive. Fail and suffer the consequences." Emma and her friends looked at each other in shock. What was happening? Who or what was controlling this game? The voice continued. "You have each been assigned a role in this game. The Seeker, the Guardian, the Challenger, and the Destroyer. Each role comes with its own set of challenges and rewards. Play wisely, for your fate is in your own hands." As the voice faded away, Emma and her friends looked at each other in horror. What had they gotten themselves into? The game was more than just a game. It was a gateway to a realm of darkness and terror, and they were trapped inside it. Emma stared at the game board, her mind racing with thoughts and questions. What did the voice mean by roles and challenges? And what was her role in this twisted game? As the Seeker, Emma had the task of finding the hidden key that would unlock the door to the next level of the game. But the key was hidden somewhere on the board, and the path to it was filled with dangers and obstacles. She took a deep breath and rolled the dice, moving her piece forward. The board creaked and groaned beneath her fingers, and she could feel the weight of the game bearing down on her. The first few moves were easy enough, but soon Emma found herself facing a maze of dark symbols and dead ends. She could hear her friends whispering nervously behind her, but she tried to tune them out and focus on the game. Finally, after what felt like hours, Emma saw a glimmer of silver up ahead. It was the key. She hurried forward, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. But just as she reached out to grab the key, a dark figure appeared out of nowhere. It was a hooded figure with glowing red eyes and a sinister grin. Emma tried to back away, but the figure moved with lightning speed, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her close. "You think you can win this game?" the figure hissed, its breath hot and fetid on Emma's face. "You're nothing but a pawn in a much larger game, and you're about to be sacrificed." Emma screamed as the figure dragged her away from the board and into the shadows beyond. She could hear her friends calling out to her, but she was powerless to resist. She was trapped in this game, and there was no escape. As the darkness closed in around her, Emma wondered if she would ever see the light of day again, or if she was doomed to spend eternity in this twisted realm of terror and death. Emma's heart raced as she was dragged through the darkness by the hooded figure. She could feel her strength ebbing away, replaced by a growing sense of dread and helplessness. She was a mere pawn in this game, and she had no idea what was in store for her. Finally, the figure came to a halt, and Emma found herself standing in front of a black altar. The altar was surrounded by flickering candles, casting shadows across the walls of the small chamber. The figure pushed Emma towards the altar, and she stumbled forward, catching herself on the edge. She looked up and saw the figure's glowing red eye staring back at her. "You're going to be our sacrifice," the figure said, its voice cold and menacing. Your blood will unlock the door to the next level, and you'll be remembered as a hero. Emma shook her head, trying to comprehend what was happening. She had never been particularly brave, and the idea of sacrificing herself for some twisted game was too much to bear. But before she could react, the figure produced a sharp blade and held it to Emma's throat. "You have no choice," it said. "Your fate is sealed." Emma closed her eyes and braced herself for the worst. But just as the blade was about to pierce her skin, there was a loud crash from outside the chamber. The figure turned towards the sound, giving Emma the chance to break free and run. She stumbled through the darkness, her heart racing with fear and adrenaline. She could hear her friends calling out to her, and she pushed herself harder, desperate to escape this nightmare. Finally, she burst out of the darkness and into the light. She looked around frantically, searching for her friends. They were huddled together, looking just as scared as she felt. "We have to get out of here," Emma said, her voice trembling. "This game is too dangerous." But as she spoke, she could feel a chill spreading through her body. Something was wrong, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Emma and her friends stumbled out of the abandoned cabin, their hearts still racing with fear and adrenaline. They had managed to escape the clutches of the haunted board game, but they were left with a sense of unease that would stay with them for a long time. As they made their way back to their homes, they talked in hushed tones about what had happened. They all agreed that the game was too dangerous and that they had been lucky to escape with their lives. But as the days passed, they began to realize that they weren't the only ones affected by the game. People in the town started reporting strange occurrences, from unexplained noises to ghostly apparitions. Emma and her friends knew that they had to do something. They couldn't let the game continue to wreak havoc on their town. So they banded together and decided to take matters into their own hands. They gathered all the pieces of the board game and destroyed them, burning them in a bonfire. As the flames licked at the pieces, they could feel the darkness lifting from their town. It was as if they had exorcised a demon from their midst. In the aftermath of the game, Emma and her friends became local heroes. They had saved their town from the grip of the haunted board game, and people looked up to them with a newfound respect. But even though they had destroyed the game, they knew that it would never truly be gone. The memory of those terrifying nights would stay with them forever, a constant reminder of the power of darkness and the importance of fighting back against it. As they sat together watching the flames die down, Emma and her friends knew that they had emerged from the game stronger and braver than before. And they knew that no matter what other horrors they might face in the future, they would always be able to stand together and face them head on